some technical issues here. Well, let's get started, everyone. I'm really proud to announce that we have reached a general agreement on the fiscal 2026 State of the State budget. I'm joined by some incredible public servants. I know you know all of them, but I want to recognize them in particular. Secretary to the Governor, Karen Persicilli-Keough. Counsel to the Governor, Brian Mahana. First budget. Gonna come back? Our Budget Director, Blake Washington. What an extraordinary job. Our Chief of Staff, Stacy Lynch. Director of State Operations, Catherine Garcia. Acting Policy Director and Commissioner of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Jackie Bray. Senior Advisor and Deputy Counsel, Josh Norkin. And I also want to give a shout out to our communications team led by Anthony Hogerby. Also, I want to recognize my partners in government. Majority Leader of the Senate, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and Carl Heastie, the Assembly Speaker. We spent many, many, many days, nights, more nights, more breakfasts, lunches, dinners in this room, working really hard to put together a budget that everyone can be proud of. And I want to say this, despite the chaos and uncertainty that's just constantly emanating out of Washington, we still delivered for the people of New York. We still got it done. And I would not take that for granted. We worked through some really challenging issues. We refused to be drawn into the toxic, divisive politics of the moment. And we never lost sight of the people that we were sent here to serve. And we never strayed away from the issues they cared the most about. Together, we designed a budget that will lift up all New Yorkers. In the next few days, the legislature will be conferencing and voting on budget bills. And as is the case every year, some final details are still yet to be worked out through that process. But now, I'll take you through where we've landed on a few key priorities and approximate numbers that we do not expect to change significantly. In my January State of the State address, I made a declaration that your family is my fight. I vowed to address the affordability crisis by putting thousands of dollars back in New Yorkers' pockets. I vowed to make common sense changes to our discovery laws to keep dangerous criminals from walking free over frivolous technical errors. I vowed to put more police on our subways to drive down crime and ensure that every rider feels safe. And I vowed to get more New Yorkers who are suffering from mental illness the compassionate care they need. And I vowed to implement a bell-to-bell ban on smartphones in our schools so our kids can concentrate in class, free from distraction. Well, we got it all done. We're still meeting the needs of New Yorkers and delivering results for all of them. With my affordability agenda, we're putting nearly $5,000 back in your pockets and making our streets and subways safer. That's what this budget is all about, so let's get into it. The overall budget, the funds are $254 billion. We're maintaining record reserves to safeguard against uncertainty, both on Wall Street and in Washington. And as you'll see, we've made some responsible adjustments to the original State of the State that I proposed as we monitor and navigate a volatile economy. So let's talk frankly about what we've been up against. Donald Trump and congressional Republicans are threatening to slash federal dollars that is vital to New York. We've already been hit with over $1.3 billion in cuts. This may just be the tip of the iceberg. And the scale of these potential cuts is simply too massive for any one state to absorb. The reality is, we can only devise a budget based on the information we have at this time. There's a possibility that we'll have to come back later this year and update our budget in response to federal actions. But at the end of the day, congressional Republicans, including 7 from our state, they have the power to stop these reckless federal cuts. They must find the political will to stand up to this administration and fight for the people they represent. You know, in my travels across the state, I heard the same message from New Yorkers over and over and over. They're struggling so much with the rising cost of living. Raising a family in America has never been more expensive. And the Trump tariffs are making it even harder for working families. I'm delivering on my plan to ease New Yorkers' financial stress, as I said, by putting more money back in their pockets. First, our historic middle-class tax cut, which is bringing rates to their lowest in 70 years and delivering much-needed relief to 8.3 million New Yorkers. Secondly, we're tripling the size of the child tax credit, providing up to $1,000 per child under the age of 4, which was literally zero when I first became governor, and up to $500 for school-age children in 2026. Third, we're investing $340 million to provide free school breakfast and lunch to all K-12 students, saving families $1,600 per child. And while I can't single-handedly stop inflation, I can help New Yorkers afford the basics. And that's why we're sending inflation refund checks to 8.2 million New Yorkers, hard-working taxpayers, up to $200 for individuals and $400 for families. You know, when you add all this up, your family's inflation refund, school breakfast and lunch, the child tax credit for your little ones, plus the middle-class tax cut, that's $5,000 back in the pockets of New York families. That's how you make a tangible difference in people's lives. We're not stopping there. Child care was one of the most significant stressors in my time as a young mom, and it's very real today. Daycare now can run over $20,000 a year, absolutely crushing families. That's why in the last 3 budgets, I've more than tripled our investment in child care. This year, we'll continue that effort with an additional $110 million to build new child care facilities, renovate existing ones. And that brings us closer to our ultimate goal of universal child care. And late in the budget process, we heard from families in New York City about a looming crisis, about the availability of child care vouchers. So we stepped in to address it. We've secured an additional $400 million for child care vouchers, covering both New York City and upstate. That's an increase from the $1.8 billion in my executive budget. With these new resources, we'll offer New York City the opportunity to match our commitment solving this year's crisis. Because every family deserves access to high-quality child care. You know, while putting money back in people's pockets is absolutely essential, economic security means very little without physical security. That's why keeping people safe has always been and always will be my top priority. Year after year, we've made record investments to crack down on crime, and it's paying off. Last year, shootings statewide reached their lowest point in more than a decade. And this year, shootings are down 53% compared to the pandemic peak era. To build on this success, we're once again directing $370 million toward proven gun violence prevention programs and $50 million to upgrade police technology. And we're adding $8 million to increase safety along our border with Canada, giving us the dedicated law enforcement and technology to stop transnational criminal organizations and the trafficking of guns, drugs, and people. We're committing $35 million for security enhancements at synagogues, mosques, and other vulnerable locations, reaffirming that hate has no place in our state. And we're ramping up criminal penalties for anyone who wears a mask to hide their identity while committing a crime or fleeing a crime scene. This goes for any crime that's an A misdemeanor or higher. Let me be clear. I'm not making these massive investments in police and public safety and strengthening our laws just to watch as criminals walk free over trivial technical issues. Too often, crime victims watch in horror as their assailants walk free, not because they're innocent, because of procedural technicalities. It's my job to fight for those victims, many of whom are domestic violence victims. That's exactly what I did. This budget delivers common sense reforms that balance the scales of justice. Our amendments will prevent cases from being dismissed over minor prosecution omissions that don't actually hurt the defense's case. These common sense changes protect defendants' rights, which is important to me, while ensuring that victims get the justice they deserve. And I want to thank the many district attorneys, victims advocates, and other stakeholders who worked hard to ensure that we found the right balance. Now let me turn to New York City's subway system and what we're doing to keep it safe. Back in January, in close partnership with the city and new Police Commissioner Tisch, we outlined a bold plan to ramp up the police presence in our subways, adding about 300 officers to overnight trains, and I promise to support this effort with $77 million, which we are now securing in this budget. With our state funding, NYPD has assigned officers to every subway train from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. The results have been swift and undeniable. Subway crime is at its lowest rate in 27 years. But safety is more than just about policing. For too long, those who are suffering from mental illness, severe mental illness, they languish on our streets and in our subways. People who pose a risk themselves and others, but also those who are too sick to secure proper health and shelter and food without help. Let me be clear. My administration has already invested $1 billion to rebuild our mental health system. We have more inpatient beds, more clinicians, and a more compassionate approach to care. And I'm proud to announce that as part of our budget, we've agreed to clarify and strengthen our involuntary commitment laws. This will allow us to connect people in the throes of severe mental illness with the life-saving care that they need and they deserve. We're also expanding Kendra's law to ensure those with serious mental illness receive consistent long-term treatment. And we're investing $40 million in the Safe Option support teams and new 24/7 shelter sites throughout the subway system. But protecting our communities requires more than streets where people feel safe. We need classrooms where young minds can flourish. And that means eliminating once and for all the digital distractions that steal our kids' attention. During my statewide tour last year, I heard the same message everywhere I went. Cell phones are holding our kids back. You've heard me say this, but one student even said, "You've got to save us from ourselves. We have to stop." That's why I'm proud that this budget establishes our landmark distraction-free schools policy. Starting this September, all schools, all public schools will implement policies that free students from smartphones and other devices bell to bell. We protected our kids before from cigarettes, alcohol, and drunk driving, and now we're protecting them from addictive technology designed to hijack their attention. Cell phones have dragged too many of our kids into dark places, but together, with this change in policy, we're helping them climb back into the light. But removing distractions is just the first step. Our schools must be equipped with the resources, material, and support that kids need to learn and to thrive. That's why we're continuing to make historic investments in education. This budget invests $37 billion in our schools. Once again, the highest amount in state history. And this marks an $8 billion increase since I first took office. And we're continuing to modernize how we fund our schools, getting rid of antiquated poverty metrics, replacing that with current census data to more accurately determine what our student needs are. And this will ensure state dollars reach the students who really need them, while guaranteeing that schools receive more funding than they would have under the old formula. And we're tearing down financial barriers that hold up too many New Yorkers from their dreams. We're making community college tuition completely free for adults aged 25 to 55 who want to build their careers in high-demand fields like healthcare, education, and advanced manufacturing, where we have far too many open positions. New York students deserve every opportunity to succeed, and this budget delivers exactly that. Let's talk about housing. Opportunity begins with a place to call home. That's why addressing the housing crisis remains my central focus. Last year, we delivered the most significant housing policy for New York in half a century. 1 year later, 300 communities have joined our pro-housing movement. New York City has been transformed in the city of yes, thanks to a $1 billion state commitment we made real in this budget. And we're well on our way to our 5-year goal, 100,000 affordable homes across the state. This year, we're building on our efforts by taking a stand against the private equity firms that are taking over our housing markets. We're going to ban them from bidding on single and two-family homes the first 90 days on the houses are on the market. You know what that does? It gives New Yorkers, a young couple been saving, want to buy that first house, gives them a fighting chance to finally own their home and build a strong foundation for their families. As we build homes for families today, we must ensure we're also ready for the challenges of tomorrow. I'm proud to say that our budget includes the largest climate investment in the history of the state budget. How? We're directing over $1 billion in funding to support 3 key priorities: keeping energy costs down, ensuring reliability so the lights stay on, and continuing our transition to clean energy. As we pursue these energy policies, we're also investing heavily to protect our communities from increasingly severe weather events. That's why adding $500 million for clean water and flood control infrastructure brings our total investment to $2.65 billion since 2022. With this budget, New York is pursuing an energy policy of abundance, where costs are lower, power is reliable, and our transition to cleaner resources continue at a pace that works for everyone. While we build a greener future, we're also improving the transportation infrastructure that connects our communities. We're fully funding the $68 billion MTA capital plan to advance critical projects, including the Interborough Express, new Metro North stations in the Bronx, and faster service in the Hudson Valley, and critical repairs to avoid another summer of hell. And we found an equitable way to pay for it. We're making modest adjustments to the payroll mobility tax to protect small businesses while ensuring large corporations contribute their share. Small businesses across the New York City region will actually see their tax burden reduced by half, while larger employers whose workforce heavily rely on mass transit will see some small increases. And we're taking the $1.2 billion previously allocated for Penn Station and using it to support this plan, to fund safety improvements and stop fare evasion. As part of the deal, we required shared sacrifice from the MTA. Just like the city and state are each contributing $3 billion to this plan, the MTA itself will find savings for the final $3 billion of this plan. Our commitment to building a stronger New York extends to every corner of this state. For the second year in a row, we're delivering $50 million in temporary municipal assistance to cities and towns across New York. That'll help local governments pay for essential workers like police officers and firefighters. You know, and Albany is New York's proud capital. We've all spent a lot of time here. It's been my home for more than 10 years. I love this community, and I believe deeply in this community and its future. But like many cities, Albany faces significant challenges that were only magnified by the pandemic. I see these challenges firsthand when I walk the streets, especially from the residents to the Capitol. I see a city that is poised and ready to be restored to its former glory. And that's why this budget launches our $400 million Championing Albany's Potential initiative to revitalize the downtown core. This transformative investment includes $200 million to targeted economic development projects. And because safety must be the foundation of any thriving community, we're providing immediate support to enhance public safety along Albany's key corridors. This budget is far more than a financial document. It's a declaration of our shared values, who we are, who we're fighting for, and a roadmap for a brighter future. We've made strategic choices and investments to reflect what matters most. As I said back in January, your family is my fight. This budget honors that promise. While Washington remains mired in division and dysfunction, We're still showing that government can work for the people. We can solve problems. We can still move forward. Why? Because we're New Yorkers. We don't back down from challenges, we overcome them. We don't give in to cynicism, we embrace optimism. And we don't settle for the status quo. We strive for far better. And I want to thank all my partners in government for the collaboration and all the hard-working state employees who will implement this vision, particularly those who've been working so tirelessly on this budget, but it's all those out there who will be implementing this as we lift up all New Yorkers. And most importantly, to the people of New York, this budget's for you. Thank you.
Governor, with the MTA capital plan, you're calling it a modest increase, but for both New York City and then the two, Hudson Valley and Long Island, the payroll mobility tax will be quite a jump. So how do you explain that? And some lawmakers say that it's kind of unfair to have the majority of large New York businesses, New York City businesses, be paying for this. And how much taxes will it actually generate within the first year?
You know, what we're trying to do is make sure that the whole region, which relies so heavily on safe, efficient public transit, you know, we all know that is the lifeblood of the entire region, and this is the economic engine for the state. I believe that most people understand that we have to continue investing now, so as happened in the past, people kick the can down the road, it's more expensive to make the repairs and maintain this going forward. So we have a lot of plans. We want to make sure that the Hudson Valley has faster trains and more opportunities to get people to work every day, making sure that they're safe. So what you have to do is have some shared sacrifice, but this region is the one that benefits most directly by having, you know, the Long Island Railroad, you know, Metro North, as well as the subway. So larger companies, you know, they have more employees. This would apply to companies with $10 billion in payroll. $10 million in payroll, $10 million in payroll. And so we're really excluding all the smaller businesses that would be hard hit. And in fact, we're giving them a tax cut. You know, we're cutting by 50% what they may be paying already. So we're looking out for the smaller businesses, the ones that are starting, and I think there's an understanding to these large employers that they have hundreds of employees that rely on this to get to work at a lower cost to them as opposed to having to drive to work. So anything else on the percentage? Was it point?
It's a 50% reduction, you said, Governor, to smaller employers. It also, you felt strongly to give some relief on the self-employed.
Yeah.
Currently, their income threshold is at $50,000. This proposal would bring up to $150,000.
But the increase in payroll, is it 0.6 to point?
So we're still working on that with the legislature.
Okay.
How much do you think it will generate towards the total 5-year capital plan? Because we have to get to the $68 billion, right? Would you prefer the MTA actually slims down that number, or do we kind of have a weird gap now that you're going to need either them to fill in? What's their contribution?
We are talking, in fact, we're looking for $3 billion worth of savings from the MTA. Basically, it's $100 million of savings, but bonded out. That's $3 billion. It's shared sacrifice. The city is paying, the state is paying, the MTA has to find more efficiencies, so combined we'll be able to afford it's an ambitious sounding capital plan, but we have no choice. Again, previous administrations over decades never did what was necessary to bring this up to speed, make sure that the signals are working, that we've expanded lines, that the trains are replaced when we need to. They're very expensive, about $10 billion to replace the trains. And so these are all costs that I'm taking responsibility and saying, now is the time to do something. You know, it's over 100 years. Again, I look back and say it would have been nice if everybody made investments over time, but I'm the one saying this is so critically important to us that we're going to pursue this ambitious plan, but we're going to make sure that it's a better product for all New Yorkers who rely on it.
Governor, on the MTA payroll tax increase, are you concerned about any sort of political fallout from this? Back in 2010, when they did something like this, Democrats lost control of the state Senate. You're running for re-election next year. You're going to have to stand before voters and justify that tax.
I think there's a dramatic change in where the burden is placed, and companies that, you know, if we're looking at companies, and again, working out the details, but companies that have approximately $10 million in payroll. I mean, I've worked for a lot of small businesses. That's out of the realm for anybody. I mean, these are large businesses, and they benefit from having an efficient transportation system for their employees. So it's a different focus on who's paying for it. Again, for small businesses, we're cutting at 50%. So that's where the focus is.
Rob?
Governor, what is the status of Mayor Scanlon of Buffalo's plans for the sale of parking ramps as well as the 3% a bed tax? Where are we with that, and is that something that is now people of Buffalo should expect to see in the budget?
That will be known very soon, over the next day or so. That has been a subject of conversation. I know the Majority Leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, has been weighing in rather heavily on the importance of trying to find some assistance that is requested by the city of Buffalo to deal with the financial crisis right now. So,
I'll interrupt. Senator Ryan put out a proposal yesterday as well to have the bond money, to have the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority basically bond out that money over 4 years. Is that something?
I think ultimately the people of Buffalo, and if there is a control board, then we'll have to look at all the options. I mean, they may need both at the table. It's a serious crisis, $70 million, and they need to have a way to make up for years where they have had problems. So I'll just leave it at that.
Kate?
Governor, curious why you're holding this announcement now, and that your lawmakers are conferencing even right now. So we're saying, I don't understand how we have hospital funding, school aid open. How is there an agreement? And also, when is the budget extender the next one going to go through?
No, what I want to focus on today was to report on my priorities that I laid out in my State of the State address and when I presented the budget in this room. And I'm really proud to say we got it done. We got it done. So yes, there are, in a budget this large and complicated, there are members who want to weigh in on their issues. This is what goes on in the conferences. But on the big ticket items, a middle-class tax cut, child tax credit, the entire affordability agenda with the inflation rebate, covering school lunches and breakfasts for families. My cell phone was critically important to me. Affordability, the discovery changes, this all took a lot of effort. And what I'm here to say is it's accomplished, and I'm really proud of it. And even, we talked about masks for a long time. To be able to build a structure, a compromise, and support, making sure that people are safe in our cities and on our subways, and we got a lot done. So, as I mentioned, the discovery laws, that's quite a list. So there are a few loose ends out there, I would say, but I think it's important for people to know that we've delivered. This is an extraordinary budget by all standards and what we've been able to accomplish.
When does the extender go through, and when do you actually plan for bills to be printed and then to vote?
Thursday, the school run alone takes 36 hours. Thursday?
For the next extender.
Yeah.
To vote on them, or?
Blake?
The next extender bill, we've been on a cadence of Tuesdays and Thursdays that will maintain throughout this week as we wait for budgets to come to print and be acted upon.
So this next one on Thursday, do you expect it to be the last extender?
From your lips to God's ears.
Governor, on the subject of the state prisons, I understand that you had at one point sought permission to lower the CO hiring age from 21 to 18 and to expand merit time and essentially getting people out of prison a little bit faster. Are any of those in the agreement that you've struck with the legislature?
I first want to set the framework for why we're in this situation. 2,000 corrections officers walked off their job and engaged in an illegal wildcat, unsanctioned strike. That left us in a precarious situation. The incarcerated population, the other corrections officers who had the courage to stay, as well as members of other workforces from PEF and CSEA, and the community at large. So a crisis was created. So I've directed my team to find an all-of-the-above approach to get more correction officers in the system. The thought that if it was 18 years old, as we have 18-year-olds working in jails all over upstate New York, and 18-year-olds who certainly have are responsible when it comes to being part of our military and going into harm's way in foreign countries. I have faith in 18-year-olds, but I know there's a lot of question about this. And our proposal was to basically say that they would, be supervised for a certain time, longer than a new employee would be, and have other constraints. So, and also, there was this presumption that we're going to be freeing all these violent criminals, and people have to worry about that. And we are trying to manage a situation where we have not enough corrections officers, we have an incarcerated population, and we have to protect everyone involved. So we've been looking at a number of options. Anybody else want to comment on that? Okay.
To be clear, is that in the budget, or are you still looking to negotiate that out of that process now?
There
Part-
will be substantial reforms in the budget. There's a couple loose ends we're tying up in the next day or two.
To follow up on, I think it might have been Kate's question, there's still very few details that even on your priorities that you have provided. I mean, the discovery is just saying we did something, but that's a very nuanced law that you haven't really provided details. You didn't include foundation aid, which is usually announced alongside the overall education aid. Why make this announcement now as opposed to just waiting that couple of extra days that you can come out here and say, this $254 million, it's the final number, $254 billion, that's a final number, because last year, even that changed from your original announcement.
So you're saying you want the budget to go longer?
This doesn't have any impact on when the budget bill is
No.
passed.
Oh,
so.
we have worked out the language of discovery, and that took an enormous amount of time. There was not an appetite to do what I thought was necessary to stop people who are, committed crimes, defendants, but obviously there's been an accusation they committed a serious crime, and so many cases are being dismissed. I mean, dismissals went from 42% to 62% since the reforms were put in place in 2019, and I've supported those. As I said before, the pendulum was too far against the defendants, but now it's gone too far against the prosecutors. The sweet spot is in the middle, and that's what we strive really hard to do, and it was arduous to address all the concerns of the legislature, but also making sure that our district attorneys, who are extraordinary and coming up here many times, and making sure that people understood what they're up against, and the victims, especially domestic violence. So we know it. We have the details here. Brian, you want to go over the details? Sure. We can lay out all the details.
Yeah. So one of the major issues that we've been trying to address is the fact that dismissals are often had for minor issues, including in particular when the speedy trial clock has already run. And so a major reform that we're making in the budget is to allow judges to conduct a holistic assessment of the discovery that has been had and not had, rather than approaching it on an item-by-item basis, which really lends itself to dismissals, to assess, using a variety of factors, the prejudice that, if there is any, to the defendant, as well as the prosecutor's efforts to exercise due diligence. The other piece is the importance of separating the speedy trial issue from a discovery violation, so that even if the speedy trial clock has already run, those factors will be utilized in order to assess whether or not, what the appropriate remedy will be, and not automatically lead to dismissals. The third piece, I would say, is limiting the amount of discovery that prosecutors are required to turn over in the first instance, narrowing it from, in many instances, there's the 21 categories that's in the discovery law, narrowing it from items that are related to the case, instead being related to the charges themselves. With respect to the sort of catch-all category, narrowing that to that which is relevant to the case rather than just related to it. In addition, creating the proper incentives so that defense attorneys don't wait for the speedy trial clock to run and then file any challenges, and expecting that the speedy trial clock will lead to a dismissal. Instead, for both felony and misdemeanor cases, there will be a 35-day period in which defense attorneys will need to file their any discovery challenges that they might be had, and there are others, but those are sort of the major ones.
On the issue of prejudice, right now, if due diligence is found to be had and good faith was found to be had, in theory, those should not be automatically dismissed. It should go and be considered separately on a more a lesser severe punishment. If they don't prove due diligence, then it gets automatically dismissed if it's after speedy trial. The issue of prejudice, if it's found to be prejudiced, does that mean that it will be automatically dismissed if it's after the speedy trial date, the same way that if due diligence is not had, it's supposed to be an automatic dismissal?
No, the judge is going to be instructed under the law to weigh all those factors holistically, both the efforts of the prosecutor to act with due diligence, as well as any harm that's suffered by the defendant as a result, like the prejudice concept. And they're supposed to craft a remedy that's appropriate, considering all of those factors. So it is not going to be the case that these cases will automatically be dismissed, regardless of whether or not the speedy trial clock has run.
You got two, better than one. Can you do that again, but for involuntary commitment, and what expanding Kendra's law mean? And then, sorry, one actual question for the governor. Was the changes you saw around how the lieutenant governor shows up on the ballot, is that in the budget?
Yes.
It is? And so now he or she, whoever it is next year, will run with you on a ticket?
Like the president and the vice president, and like the many, many, many other states, yes.
We'll connect Brian and other members of our team before. I think
Yeah.
we all would benefit from.
Do you want to explain the involuntary? All right.
And Jackie should
Okay.
weigh in as needed.
Yeah.
So the first on the involuntary commitment piece, a major piece of what really the major component of what the governor wanted to accomplish in the budget was to have enacted in state law, in the mental hygiene law, that people can be involuntarily committed if they are a substantial risk, or they are at a substantial risk of physical harm due to the inability to meet their basic needs. So that is the major piece that's codified in the law, and that aligns New York with 43 other states. In addition, even prior to this budget, the governor has been making efforts to coordinate care for people after they've been voluntarily committed and they're being discharged. So we are codifying in law statute that will require hospitals to coordinate their care much more holistically after they are discharged. We are also giving more flexibility, so there are two different practitioners who are supposed to be involved in a decision to involuntarily commit someone. And under current law, it's just two doctors, so we are also enabling nurse practitioners to be one of the professionals that are involuntarily committing people. And then, when in many places, in particular in New York City, the individuals, if they are on the street, EMS currently does the transportation to a hospital, but that's not required under law. And now, where practicable, where that's actually within the ability and capacity of the emergency services operation, they will be required to utilize emergency services.
So I just want to thank my team for working so hard on both the discovery and the involuntary. Just for the record, even with our changes in discovery, it'll still be viewed as the most progressive discovery laws in the nation. We worked hard to make sure that the cases where people are walking free because of a technicality, unrelated to guilt or innocence, walking free, those days need to end, and they're going to be over because of these changes. Secondly, it has always been, to me, a travesty to see people languishing on the streets or in our subways who clearly cannot make decisions for themselves, who feel abandoned. And I just think it's far more compassionate for us to make sure that they get the help they need. As mentioned, we've invested well over $1 billion over the last few years to prepare for this time, that we have more beds available, we have more clinicians, we have exit strategies where there's discharge plans where people actually will be getting follow-up care. So this is how we start making a real difference in the quality of life for these people, but also for people who are afraid on the streets that this could be an individual who could cause harm to themselves, that they can have that greater sense of security that they deserve.
Governor, on masks, what we arrived at is obviously not a mask ban like we discussed last year in this room. If standing with the Jewish community is so important to you, then why did you settle for this watered-down proposal on masks?
The community that rose up and asked for changes supports this. They were involved in crafting this, and the word mask ban was probably an overstatement in terms of, we always knew we were going to allow for religious purposes or for health purposes, so that was a broad description, but basically what people are looking for is to not have someone be able to get away with wearing a mask when they're harming another person or committing a crime or harassing or threatening. We got to that. That's exactly what this does.
This is going to stop all the mask harassment that we're seeing in New York? This is going to help combat that?
When you write laws, you never can stand here and say, oh, this will solve this problem 100%. I don't know any law that you can guarantee would end up in that category. But I think what your premise of your first part of your question was, is this supported by the groups that came forward? Now, this was, again, a law that was put in place to stop the KKK, the original mask ban that was suspended during COVID. And we're just trying to get back to what are our concerns. I don't want people wearing a mask on a subway being able to beat the crap out of somebody, excuse my language, but beat them up, even though I have cameras on the trains and I can't identify them. The police cannot identify them. So anyone in the commission of a crime, or if it's assaulting someone, vandalizing a building, or threatening and harassing. So this is broader than just, maybe what some communities were hoping for. This actually covers a larger area because, as you know, we have to fight crime. We have to protect our citizens. And those who are trying to, hurt others and vandalize or threaten, disguising their identity, they shouldn't be able to get away with that. And this law is going to start getting at that.
Zach, Governor, you've talked a lot about affordability. Right now, New Yorkers who are on unemployment benefits are making hundreds of dollars less per week because New York, almost alone among all states in the country, has not paid off its COVID unemployment debt to the feds. Is this budget going to pay off that debt? And if not, why?
Well, first of all, the reason why we had the largest unemployment expense in the nation. We had the most people out of work in we were the epicenter of the pandemic.
We received disproportionately high number of federal stimulus dollars and spent none of it alone among 50 states.
Right. Decisions were made before my time. I will acknowledge that, okay? I have to do a lot of cleanup. And so what I'm talking about is conversations we've been having about what we do with this. Right now, it'd be about $8 billion? Nearly $8 billion added on to the cost of our budget. So we're wrestling with this. I'm cognizant of the fact that because Donald Trump is probably crashing our economy and heading us toward a recession, and a recession means more people be unemployed, it is something that is very much in our conversations, but we're trying to manage, taking $8 billion out of our coffers to solve this problem that'll actually be resolved in 2 years. I think in 2 more years they'll be paid off. Is that right, Blake? Okay.
So the budget will not pay off the UI debt?
No.
It will pay the interest, though, the annual interest as you propose?
Yeah, we're trying to reduce the cost for employers. We've heard them, we're concerned about them, and we want to alleviate that burden on them.
Thank you, President.
Thank you. Governor, you talked about the impending fiscal uncertainty and the need to be a little bit more conservative than originally planned. How much did you put into reserves, or does this budget put into reserves? And where did you cut back from your original proposals? Are there any areas specifically that you can say where you didn't put as much in as you had wanted to?
Down about $400 million. Also scaled back the amount under my inflation rebate a little bit. Still giving a rebate to 8.2 million New Yorkers, in addition to the tax cut, middle-class tax cut. But I had to step back and say, the world has changed dramatically since Inauguration Day. So when I put forth my budget, and my focus was trying to alleviate the pain that families are going through because of inflation, which is no fault of their own, could not have foreseen the upheaval in our economy. With Wall Street, for example, we rely heavily on Wall Street bonuses to help us pay for, help finance our budget. That's an area we don't know how it's going to be at the end of this year. Who knows what Wall Street's going to look like even tomorrow? And the cost of everything for families and the state of New York is going up. I mean, our road salt and all the other things, the thousands of commodities that we have to purchase to run government. So we've decided to scale back this year in this budget with the information that was emerging only literally in the last few weeks. But Blake, you want to comment on that?
I think you hit all the highlights, Governor. We did take down a series of initiatives. Governor mentioned $400 million. Those are items that were included in our State of the State address or as part of our State of the State actions and then just base budget increases year over year. And those are things that the governor feels deeply about, things that we would love to do, but just trying to be mindful of the restraints of what we're facing, but some of the new costs that we brought on. The governor mentioned earlier the prison crisis, which we're financing at a pretty fast clip. We're anticipating about $700 million in the upcoming year for the prison staffing shortages specifically. The child care crisis is another $400 million. So we were trying to just get back to a level that we think it was more sustainable into the future.
But to your question about reserves, for me, the gold standard, for accountants and people who monitor this, is 15%. When I became governor, it was 4%. It is 15%. We have maintained that at $21 billion in reserves. Again, a rainy day, or as happens in New York, if we have a major recession, it'll be a hurricane. But I have to make sure that we're setting aside the money that may be needed if there's a crisis that hits our state like of that magnitude.
All right, Caitlin, Maria, and then we gotta go.
Governor, in terms of the Medicaid budget, could you walk me through where you landed on that spending? And are there any savings in that budget that account for, what's to come down the line, as we've been hearing of federal cuts on that?
Well, we looked at savings starting last year with the CDPAP program, which was a program intended to allow people who needed home health care to select their own provider. It cost $1.9 billion back in 2015, and now we've exceeded $11 billion. So our budget before anything, baseline between education and Medicaid, is about 7%. So, no, the 7% increase, it was 2 point.
I would say roughly 50%.
50% of the budget. So Blake, I'll let you explain, what else we've done, but programs like that, we don't see the savings yet, but we will. And that was important to get that right, and we are still completing that transition, but almost there. We're very, very far along.
So just to be clear, of the overall increase, the increase year over year, roughly 50% is attributed to Medicaid and school aid. On Medicaid, we're still going through a series. The governor had a handful of actions in our proposal, which the legislature and our teams are working through now. We expect resolution on those imminently. And I think that for sure one of our biggest actions was, as the governor alluded to, the CDPAP single FI last year, implementing that and ultimately changing the trajectory of spending in that program in the long run.
Is CDPAP still going to garner $500 million? Are you still expecting those types of savings? And did it save $250 million in the last budget?
We're cautiously optimistic. There have been some, I know there's some enrollment in other programs. There's been some shifting, as you're aware, from consumers to one program or the other. And as I say over and over and over again, it's the governor's charge. The savings are very, very important. The consumer experience is even more so. So we know there's certainly consumers are making different choices. We're watching that closely. We also know, unfortunately, that some of the companies that have much to lose are providing, bad or no information to constituencies. The Department of Health, the ops team have been putting untold numbers of bodies up against that just to make sure that transition works really smoothly, and so we're optimistic that it'll carry.
Are you looking at other areas of the Medicaid budget to pull back on costs? Because I know House Republicans have spoken about how they think the state's increase in the Medicaid budget is going up unnecessarily, and they see, as they consider cuts at the federal level. So, this would be something that you would have to contend with. So, are you looking at, if you come back, kind of creating a plan for what to do, in the meantime?
The real drivers of what the Medicaid costs are is people using Medicaid. And so if you are going to cut Medicaid, you are cutting the eligibility of people. And I think that we need to be holding our Republican congressional delegation accountable for when those cuts happen and if they happen. I don't think it's a done deal. I think it'll be very, very hard for some people to cast that vote to literally cut people off of health insurance. But that is the real driver. The real driver is the number of people in the program.
All right, Marie, last one.
Yeah, Governor, could you provide a little more detail about that $1 billion for climate, what it's going to be used for? And do you really think that's enough, given sort of the federal picture right now on climate policy? Trump, pulling the plug almost on an offshore wind project that was already under construction. And one more, is the expanded waivers for electrifying school buses in there?
No, it's stunning in its scale what the Trump administration is doing to our renewable energy policies. Absolutely unnecessary. These are industries that are well on their way. We already have homes that are receiving offshore wind power. We had a plan to power about 500,000 homes under the initiatives that were underway with Empire Wind and Sunrise. And it's really frustrating because these are areas where we worked really hard to get these in place, and the whole lengthy process. I think the offshore wind proposals have been there for maybe 7 or 8 years. I don't know if anybody remembers. I saw a number that was shocking. They finally happened, and then the Trump administration just says, no, they're gone. Well, we're in court. We don't think that they have the authority to be able to pull previously approved licenses for offshore wind. But that is hurting us. And also the fact that they stopped money. They already cut, as I said, $1.3 billion, and part of that was money for electric vehicles. Part of it is for people researching vaccinations and preparing for the next pandemic and other really important public health initiatives. FEMA dollars are at risk. I mean, you think about the environment, we're getting slammed with so many natural disasters, and to think that FEMA money may not be there to help these families on Long Island and the Hudson Valley where they seem to hit the hardest. But Jackie, you want to talk about that, or is that Catherine? Catherine knows.
So certainly the $1 billion, which is an enormous amount of money, is part of what we're going to need to do a full transition. Obviously, we are confronting, as the governor said, some incredible challenges in this new administration. But what some of the money is going to be designed for is expanding geothermal, heating and cooling for building systems, more EV charging infrastructure, and we will lock down the detail as we move forward. But we feel pretty good about where that's going to go because they're investments we know we need to make. So it's not good money after bad. These are things that are going to help us into the future.
So do you think it's enough, though, to really respond to this moment, to keep New York on track to meet some of its targets?
On track, I do believe that it is enough because you're talking about a lot of projects that will still take us time to get into the ground.
Mm-hmm. And waivers for electric school buses?
That's moving forward in the budget.
You still
All right.
spend $1 billion on middle-class tax cuts?
Pardon me?
Is it still $1 billion for middle-class tax cuts?
Hell yes.
Oh, yeah.
Change?
We are cutting middle-class taxes. The child tax credit, I think, is going to be an extraordinary change to help families, particularly those that are struggling, lift them out of poverty. And it all adds up. And if anybody questions whether or not an inflation rebate is a good idea, go with me to a grocery store and walk and push a shopping cart as a mom is putting everything from eggs to diapers and bread and tuna fish in the cart. And just when you say, we're going to put more money back in your pockets, how do you feel? And all of a sudden, there's just a sigh of relief. Thank you for understanding us. Thank you for, trying to just help us as we're getting through the stresses of everyday life. And it's something I can relate to from my early years as a mom, and I just have this empathy toward all the parents. So I think there's, as much as it's easy to criticize everything here, it was all focused on helping lift up New York families. And I'm really proud of this budget. Again, it exceeded all expectations in terms of the policies that were questioned by many, that could it really be done? And we worked so hard with our partners in the legislature, Andre Stewart-Cousins, the majority leader, and Carl Hastie, the speaker. We really worked hard together to deliver for New Yorkers. Thank you very much, everybody.